Vandeputte, what camera sensor do you use? Is it a crop sensor, a full frame sensor, or a micro four thirds sensor? Let me know in the comments. The MFT or M43 or Micro Four Thirds camera system is a camera standard that was developed by Panasonic and Olympus back in 2008. It actually evolved from the 4/3 camera system around 2003, which was used for early generation DSLRs. Micro Four Thirds cameras have obviously an aspect ratio of 4:3, whereas full frame has 3:2, and are digital, mirrorless, interchangeable lens cameras. There are pros and cons to this Micro Four Thirds system, which I will be talking about in this video, and at the end I will talk about whether the Micro Four Thirds camera system might be better for us time-lapse photographers. First, for some more context, if you know me, you know I own a bunch of cameras. I still have my 62 1DX Mark II. I shoot a lot on an S1, an S5. I'm recording currently on the GH6, which is of course an M4III camera. Got a couple of bridge cameras like the FZ82, I've got the P1000 as well, and then I've got a bunch of analog toys. The reason I'm telling you this is a new system for me. I've never shot on Micro Four Thirds. I recently got one, a GH6 from Lumix Australia, because I was helping out my friend Rob Mullally with creating some educational time-lapse content for them. And I never expected to like this system as much as I am loving it right now. Before talking about why it may or may not be better for time-lapse photographers, let's talk about the pros and the cons of this system in case you're not too familiar with it like I was before this whole GH6 adventure, pretty much. First up, really simple, Micro Four Thirds cameras tend to be much smaller and much more lightweight, as well as the lens is smaller and more lightweight, which can really help you if you have a painful back or you have a good back that might turn into a painful back, which is what happened to me after years of lugging around a 15 to 20 kilo backpack with motion control gear, full frame, DSLRs, 3 sets in there, a couple of lenses, extra batteries, chargers, etc. I now have 2 bulging discs in my lower back, and I really regret that, obviously. Maybe that was always going to happen, but I don't think those 15-20 kilo backpack camera mission hikes helped with that at all. So that is something to consider for sure. If you're traveling for your work a lot, you can pack more kit in the same bag, so you can have a wider range of content that you create, or you can just pack down and have a smaller and more lightweight bag for your travels. Micro Four Thirds cameras are, again, relatively speaking to the larger sensor cameras, cheaper, more affordable, more accessible for a lot of people. So you have a lower price point, which means that you don't need to save up as much money, or you can buy 2 cameras for the price of a higher end full frame mirrorless camera. Now there are exceptions to that, as with most reels generally, but generally they are cheaper. Most modern day Micro Four Thirds cameras are absolutely jam-packed with features. Not sure why that is. My gut feeling tells me they're playing the underdog role and they're just trying to cram in a bunch of stuff. So the GH6 has, ProRes recording. It's got synchro scan, which allows me to film with this neon sign without it flickering like crazy. I can dial in the exact shutter speed as I want. There's so many really technical advancements in this camera and in other Micro Four Thirds cameras that is something to consider if you're looking for bleeding edge technology. Now, a point that I absolutely adore, the lens mount is an open standard, kind of like the L-mount alliance with Sigma, Lumix, Leica, etc. You can use the lenses interchangeably. On the Micro Four Thirds system, you can use a huge amount of lenses from other brands and you can mix and match, and this opens up more lenses, more gear, more shots, more options for you as a shooter at a more affordable price point. For example, on the camera here, this is a Leica lens. I can use a Lumix lens on there, or I can use an Olympus lens on there. That's pretty nice. With that comes, of course, adapters. This is a K&F Concept EF to Micro Four Thirds adapter that I bought for about 20 or 30 pounds. I think it's an analog one, so it doesn't translate any data between the lens and the camera, so I can't adjust my aperture or have autofocus or stabilization, which you don't necessarily need for time lapses, but I can now mount all of my Canon glass on this camera with a 20 or 30 pound adapter, which is pretty nice as well. Now, depending on which way you're looking, wide or tight, if you're a tele kind of person, because of the smaller sensor, you get a larger so-called crop factor. So if you have a 70 to 200 lens equivalent focal length on a full frame, if you mount that on a Micro Four Thirds cameras, you times 2 those numbers and you get a 140 to 400 millimeter lens paired with up to 6K video recording. I can shoot some really cool content with all of the existing kit that I have just because this sensor is smaller and I bought myself this cheap adapter. One that threw me off at the start is the aspect ratio I mentioned in the beginning. Now, if you're creating content for social media, for YouTube or Square for Instagram, or 4x5 or 9x16 for TikTok or Reels, for example, the almost square aspect ratio makes it easier to crop vertical stuff out of your entire frame. If you have a lower frame, you get a smaller selection of your footage. I hope that makes sense, but it's something that I never really considered, but it's something that I've been utilizing. I've been shooting a lot on the GH6, and a lot of that time-lapse footage is just a little bit easier to crop for post. You also see this in the new GoPro Hero 11 sensor, which I think is 8x7, so almost square, which just, yeah, allows you to reframe in post super easily, and something I never really thought about, but it's definitely a big pro point for me. So that's a pretty decent list of positive. If I've missed any, please let me know. As I told you, I'm fairly new to the Micro Four Thirds camera system. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's have a look at the negatives, because it's not all rose scents and moonshine, roosgeur maneschijn, as we would say back in Belgium. Fewer megapixels, high-peak megapixels. The GH6 currently has the highest number of megapixels available in a Micro Four Thirds camera system, and it tops out at 25 megapixels. I'm getting confused now, which is, I mean, it's a lot of pixels obviously, but most modern day full frame mirrorless cameras have from 35 to 45 or even more if you're looking at the Fujis, etc. That is just a lot more data, a lot more stuff to work with. You can go on bigger screens, bigger prints, etc. Having a smaller sensor means that your pixels, the little areas that catch all the photons, are smaller as well, which means they capture fewer of those photons, which means it is not as good in low light. Now there are, a lot of advancements that have been made in that realm, but still there is no comparison between a full frame sensor with juicy large pixels on it that just gobble up all of the photons versus the very tiny pixels that are on the Micro Four Thirds camera system. This obviously affects your nighttime shooting and your astro shooting, which for a lot of people is something once you get into it, you absolutely become obsessed with it, adore it, love it. So keep that in mind. Up next, to get a similar depth of field, bokeh, creamy look on a Micro Four Thirds sensor or camera, you need a faster lens because of how optics work. I'm not going to go into depth there, but a 1.8 lens on a full frame, if you slap that lens on a Micro Four Thirds camera, it does not give you the same shallow depth of field. So if you're into shooting portraits, that is not really great for you because you want to separate your subject or eyes specifically from a face or from a backdrop. It is harder to do that on Micro Four Thirds cameras. Generally, the autofocusing on Micro Four Thirds cameras isn't as good as the full frame equivalents, but I have zero complaints about the GH6, and again, I haven't used many other Micro Four Thirds cameras, so I can't really judge that, but that was a point that was talked about online quite a bit as I was doing research for this video. The next one is a really weird one, and it's niche, and some people might not be bothered by that at all, but I do want to mention it. Depending on the client, if you're on a commercial shoot and you rock up with a tiny camera versus a big camera, that might affect how you are perceived as a professional. I find this extremely silly, in my opinion, and in a lot of my peers, and probably, I hope, in your opinion as well. It is not about the kit you use, it is about the vision that you have and the results that you deliver at the end. Doesn't matter what you shoot on. Obviously, higher end systems tend to be larger, tend to be more reliable, tend to be more functional or whatever. But for me, that really isn't a point, but I thought I wanted to flag it because I came up with, like, oh, that is maybe something to mention. What you could do is just buy, a cage for it and or a battery grip or a side handle, put a monitor on there, etc. to rig it up and make it look more professional. But yeah, I thought I'd flag that as a potential issue. One thing I've read online that I haven't experienced myself because I haven't done the in-depth testing comparing it to other sensors, the dynamic range might not be as good on Micro Four Thirds compared to full frame. I'll have to do some more digging for that. Maybe I'll keep you posted on that in a future video. That is the list of negatives, and we're getting to the point now. Is a Micro Four Thirds camera system better for time-lapse photographers or not? Surprise, surprise, it depends on the kind of time-lapse photography that you prefer, that you shoot, that you love, or that you want to be doing. As I mentioned, if you're into astrophotography or low light stuff, probably not ideal for you because of the smaller pixels and the lesser abilities in low light. However, if you are a travel or landscape photographer, you might want to pack more kit in the same bag, or as I mentioned, pack the same kit in a smaller bag so you can go on longer hikes, etc. If you're the kind of person that is obsessed with shooting really long stuff, you can use existing long lenses and an X2 teleconverter and one of these adapters to get some stupid long shots of like moonrises or sunsets or whatever. Watch out when shooting the sun with extremely long lenses with no filters. You will just melt your camera if you're not careful. If you have a variety of outputs for your work, social media, YouTube, Instagram, etc., the square aspect ratio might be very useful for you. And then if you're obsessed with high resolution content, 8K, 10K, 12K, master files that come out of your edits, this isn't the system for you, doesn't have enough pixels for that. So I hope that this has given you an insight. I couldn't really find a video like this out there. Is Micro Four Thirds better for time-lapse photographers? That covers all these things. So I hope this was useful for you. If you've ever considered buying a Micro Four Thirds camera, I hope this has been helpful. Would love to hear your thoughts. As I mentioned at the start, are you on full frame, crop, Micro Four Thirds, or maybe even medium format? Let me know in the comments. It always helps. If you have video requests or anything, just drop it in the comments down below. You know, I always try to reply. Check out my free ebooks. I've got one about time-lapse, I've got one about hyperlapse, and it teaches you all the basics to get started with that, and then you can advance to the courses as well. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. May the clouds forever be in your favor. I don't know if you've seen Cloud yet. He's sitting over there now. But yeah, we'll keep moving things around. Bye-bye.